Is Walter here? Quite a lot here, and just ask you to paraphrase as much as you possibly can. I appreciate it.
Thank you for the opportunity to comment on the environmental and public health concerns of natural gas drilling, wastewater, and hydrofracturing wastewater problems in New York. I commend your efforts because I believe this issue warrants New York's utmost concern. For decades, New York has failed to identify, investigate, and clean up gas drilling wastewater hazards reported at hundreds of sites. Toxics Targeting has compiled detailed data from the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation's Hazardous Substances Spills database regarding gas drilling wastewater releases that have reportedly impacted homes, waterways, drinking water wells, and natural resources. New York's existing gas drilling wastewater problems could be vastly exacerbated if Marcellus Shale horizontal hydrofracking is permitted to proceed without adequate safeguards. I urge you to require that the problems I will document today be fully resolved before New York's de facto horizontal hydrofracking moratorium is lifted by the adoption of a final supplemental generic environmental impact statement. I would note that approximately 7,000 gas production wells in New York generate flowback and produced wastewater. A comparable number of oil production wells in the state also generate produced water. There is currently no regulatory system to track those wastewaters from, quote, cradle to grave, close quote. As a result, the volume and fate of those wastewaters is unknown to environmental authorities. You've heard a great deal about the constituents in the wastewater. I would note that the total dissolved solids that have been reported in gas drilling wastewater generated in Pennsylvania is up to 413,000 parts per million. The key thing about TDS is it's soluble in water. In contrast, the petroleum hydrocarbons, notably in the diesel range, have been reported up to 72,600 parts per billion in gas drilling wastewater generated in West Virginia. This is insoluble in water, and as we've heard so much, contains benzene, reportedly up to 660 parts per billion. Many of these constituents resist biodegradation and are toxic at extremely low levels of exposure. For example, the maximum contaminant level for benzene in New York State drinking water is only 5 parts per billion. That's 5 seconds in 32 years. You've heard a lot about the naturally occurring radioactive materials. I would note that radium-226 has a half-life of 1,600 years. These are very toxic, very persistent compounds. I would note that while a great deal of attention has been focused on flowback concerns, contaminant concentrations in produced water are often higher for all three contaminant categories. In short, both flowback and produced wastewaters are highly complex mixtures of hundreds, if not thousands, of inorganic as well as organic compounds. To date, those wastewaters have yet to be fully characterized by analytical studies. I want to focus on three categories of gas drilling wastewater problems that we've had in New York. Massive gas drilling wastewater releases are documented to have been caused by hundreds and perhaps thousands of spills, accidents, and other uncontrolled discharges in New York. Gas drilling wastewater spills up to 100,000 gallons have been reported to DEC in a single incident. Many spills are never cleaned up in strict compliance with remediation requirements. Shockingly, there is no specific regulatory requirement even to report gas drilling wastewater releases in New York. As a result, the full scope of this problem is unknown. In contrast, petroleum releases are required to be reported to DEC's hotline within 2 hours, or fines up to $25,000 can be levied per day of noncompliance. I've given you a series of actual DEC data for national fuel gas, wells, et cetera, that have been reported. You can see brine tank overflow due to apparent equipment failure, materials flowing overland into local creek, doesn't meet standards, and the problem occurred in 1997. So you can look at all of those data. I've posted them on the internet. Perhaps the most shocking thing that I've discovered in the last 2 years is that DEC has long approved land spreading of gas drilling wastewater for dust control, winter de-icing, and roadbed stabilization. DEC's Beneficial Use Determination Program has approved natural gas wastewater to be spread untreated on roadways at farms, residential and business properties, a summer camp for children, a water treatment plant, the Chautauqua County Fairgrounds, state lands, as well as areas adjoining critical water supply sources, including a major reservoir and sole source and primary aquifers, and these include Chemung, Tompkins, Broome, Tioga, Shenango, Steuben, Cayuga, Cortland, Madison, Genesee, Chautauqua, Cattaraugus, Allegheny, and other counties. In Chautauqua County alone, in 2010 to 2011, 1,322,450 gallons of gas well production brine were spread. You can review those documents. Contrary to DEC's assertion that the BUD program requires the gas drilling wastewater to be spread safely, DEC's own data refute this assertion. You can read examples that I posted. The Tuscarora brine application, June 21st, 2010. Quote, caller states town is using brine from gas wells to control dust on dirt roads and are applying it way too heavy, causing runoff to ditches and streams. Also concerned about his well and what might be in the brine, close quote. And this spill still does not meet applicable standards. In short, gas drilling wastewater should have been banned from land spreading decades ago when spraying waste oil on dusty roads was outlawed, along with burying garbage in open pits. It is inconceivable that DEC still authorizes spreading of this toxic radioactive material on roadways and watersheds all over central, southwestern, and the Leatherstockings region of New York. And I've presented a map for your review. You've heard a lot today about the contribution of gas drilling wastewater to publicly owned treatment works. I want to note that tens of millions of gallons have been discharged in New York in recent years. These POTWs are neither designed, constructed, nor maintained to be able to break down or remove gas drilling wastewater pollutants. This is an extremely important public policy matter that must be fully resolved prior to permitting horizontal hydrofracking in New York's tight shale. The gas drilling wastewater is fundamentally incompatible with this, quote, secondary, close quote, biological treatment systems employed at virtually all municipal treatment systems in New York to break down human sewage. These, quote, activated sludge, close quote, and, quote, trickling filter, close quote, or biotower systems promote the growth of bacteria that degrade human wastewater components. Many of the constituents of gas drilling wastewater resist biological degradation and, quote, pass through, close quote, into receiving bodies of water, concentrate in residual biosolids or sludge, and compose hazards to treatment plant workers. It is entirely appropriate that your hearing is being held today in Canandaigua because the Canandaigua wastewater treatment plant reportedly received 177,000 gallons of gas drilling wastewater generated in Pennsylvania by EOG Resources, Inc. without knowing the source of the wastewater. The facility reportedly stopped accepting all gas drilling wastewater in September 2009. Prior to that time, it had reportedly accepted gas drilling wastewater for up to 9 years. Canandaigua exemplifies how toxic gas drilling wastewater has been discharged to POTWs in New York's Finger Lakes region without approved pretreatment and in contravention of pretreatment and other regulatory requirements. This illustrates the fundamental inadequacy of New York's enforcement efforts regarding this concern. I wanted to note that EPA has undertaken extensive investigation of gas drilling wastewater going to POTWs that are not equipped or regulated to manage that material. These efforts occurred after more than 850,000 local residents near Pittsburgh could not drink water drawn from the Monongahela River in the autumn of 2008 after gas drilling wastewater discharges caused unacceptably high TDS levels in the river's ambient water. Local POTWs were reportedly accepting gas drilling wastewater up to 40% of their influent. And I've again posted extremely detailed technical comments that have been provided by EPA to DEC. Basically, we're in a de facto moratorium in New York with regard to horizontal hydrofracking in tight shale. And I believe that it is absolutely imperative that the concerns I have summarized today are fully resolved prior to the permitting of horizontal hydrofracking in New York's tight shales. As you know, there is an executive order. It's very onerous, and I do not believe that DEC has fulfilled the requirements to basically protect New York from horizontal hydrofracking. I would suggest that you review a coalition letter that has nearly 11,000 signatories calling for the revised draft to be withdrawn. Among the concerns that are referenced in that letter, we've asked Governor Cuomo to ban gas drilling wastewaters from being discharged into publicly owned treatment works designed for sanitary waste, and we've requested that strict pretreatment standards be adopted. This is very important. We've heard a lot about recycling. Gas drilling wastewaters, including flowback as well as produced water or brine, are currently exempted from extremely stringent GA effluent limitations designed to safeguard drinking water drawn from the ground in New York. So the GA effluent limitations were adopted decades ago because so many people, particularly on Long Island, have only one source of water, that's from the ground, and hundreds of wells were impacted. So currently, the gas drilling wastewater can be re-injected into the ground as fracking fluid or as cutting fluid only because there is an exemption from those very strict GA effluent limitations. The revised draft ESCIS fails to eliminate this exemption, even though gas drilling wastewater is documented to contain pollutant concentrations that would vastly exceed applicable GA effluent standards. For example, benzene reported in gas drilling wastewater up to 660 parts per billion is only allowed at 1 part per billion in permitted groundwater discharges. Finally, I suggest that the land spreading of the toxic drilling wastewater also be banned. And I would note that the horizontal hydrofracking, as you've heard, is really deep well injection because up to 95% of the fracking fluid reportedly remains in the ground. In New York, deep well injection permitting requires individual environmental impact statement review, not the generic EIS review that DEC is currently undertaking. In short, the entire premise of the ESCI permit guideline proceeding is specious. This is another reason why DEC's efforts are inadequate and warrant starting the process all over again. And I would note that these exemptions should be lifted by regulatory fiat. They don't need new laws to be passed. And I've given you data that I compiled for the Niagara Falls wastewater treatment plant. I personally sampled this effluent in 1981 as part of a landmark study of the Niagara River. So while that facility does have granular activated carbon treatment, that's, again, only for the insoluble compounds, and you can see many of the compounds pass right through, including benzene, phenol, so there's no panacea, and that carbon would not take out the total dissolved solids, including the various toxic metals that you've heard about so much today. Thank you very much. I appreciate the time, and if you have any questions, I'll try to answer them.
Just briefly, what do you have listed here in Niagara Falls from this night? Can you explain that a little bit, the 1981 figures that you have here?
Yes. So basically, as you know, that is an area that is very unusual because it has many industries that were originally online. Many fewer today, unfortunately, than earlier. So you can tell that many of these compounds are volatile organic compounds, notably benzene. These are very common industrial solvents and intermediates. They're also turning up in wastewater that's discharged online to the treatment plant. Unfortunately, the activated carbon doesn't take out anything. The most important thing to realize when it comes to toxic organic compounds, that means they're principally made out of carbon and hydrogen. They're very toxic at extraordinarily low levels of exposure. So the standards are frequently 5 parts per billion, 10 parts per billion, 50 parts per billion. Those are minuscule levels, and they're just passing through into the receiving body of river. And the lower Niagara is an impaired water body. It's on the National 303D Registry of Impaired Water Bodies. So this system is not taking out these toxic organic chemicals and heavy metals. And if the gas drilling wastewater would discharge into this plant, it would similarly pass through, concentrate in the solids, and potentially pose a hazard to the workers.
Gotcha. I appreciate that. Thank you. I don't have any other further questions. I don't know.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.